The morning my husband was buried, my daughter-in-law wore white. Not cream, not ivory. White. Like a bride. Like a blank page, like someone who had already decided how the next chapter would be written. I noticed it the moment she stepped out of my son's car, her heels clicking against the church parking lot, her chin lifted just slightly higher than grief would allow. My son walked half a step behind her, the way he always did now. The way he had done for the past 4 years, ever since she came into our lives and quietly rearranged everything in it. I didn't say anything. I was 63 years old. I had just lost the man I'd spent 38 years building a life with, and I had learned the hard way, over many quiet dinners and swallowed words, that saying anything only ever made things worse. So, I said nothing. I folded my hands. I walked into the church. And I told myself that whatever came next, I would handle it. That's what women like me do. We handle things. What I didn't know, standing in that parking lot watching my daughter-in-law smooth her white dress in the reflection of a car window, was that what came next had already started. The papers had already been drawn. The plan had already been set in motion. And by the time I understood what was happening, they had already decided that the lake house, my lake house, the one my husband had bought with 30 years of overtime and careful saving, the one where my children had learned to swim, and where I'd watched 1,000 sunsets from the back porch, already belonged to them. At least in their minds. My husband's name was Donald. Don. To everyone who loved him, he was a civil engineer who made his own bread on Sunday mornings and kept a journal every single day from the age of 22 until the week he couldn't hold a pen anymore. Pancreatic cancer. 7 months from diagnosis to the end. He handled it the way he handled everything, quietly, methodically, with a kind of stubborn grace that made everyone around him cry even when he himself did not. 2 weeks before he died, he called our attorney. I sat in the corner of the bedroom pretending to read, while Don spoke in a low voice for 40 minutes. When he hung up, he looked at me for a long time. "Everything goes to you," he said. "The house, the accounts, the lake house, all of it. I've made it very clear. Dawn, Margaret." He said my name the way he always did when he needed me to really listen. "The lake house especially. I know what I know. Promise me you won't let it go." I promised. I didn't fully understand why he felt he needed to ask. I do now. The will was read 6 days after the funeral in our attorney's office on a Tuesday afternoon. I arrived first and sat in the chair nearest the window, out of habit, I suppose, or maybe because I already knew, somewhere in my body, that I needed to be able to see everything clearly. My son arrived 12 minutes late. My daughter-in-law arrived with him, which surprised me. She had never met Don's attorney. She had no reason to be there. But she sat down beside my son, crossed her legs, opened her handbag, and took out her phone as if she had every right to be in that room. As if she had been invited. She had not been invited. The attorney, a steady man in his 60s named Gerald, glanced at her briefly over his glasses. Then he looked at me, and I gave him the smallest shake of my head. "Not now. Let's just get through it." The will was straightforward. Gerald read it in his measured, unhurried voice. The house, the accounts, the investment portfolio, all to me. And the lake house on Lake Carver, along with the property surrounding it, valued at $890,000, to me, solely and entirely, with a specific clause stating it could not be sold, transferred, or placed in any joint arrangement without my written consent, notarized, with a 72-hour waiting period. Don had added that last part himself. I only learned that detail later. My daughter-in-law's face didn't change. That was the thing that stayed with me. Most people, when they hear news that surprises them, show something. A flicker, a tightening around the eyes. She showed nothing. She simply recapped her lipstick, dropped it back into her handbag, and smiled at me like we'd just finished a pleasant lunch. "We should talk soon," she said. "About the lake house. We have some ideas." "I'm sure you do," I said. That was the first Tuesday. By the following Friday, my son had called me 4 times. The first call was gentle. He missed his dad. He was worried about me being alone. Maybe it would be good for all of us to spend more time together. Maybe the lake house could be a way to do that. A family project. Something to keep us connected. Something his father would have wanted. I listened. I said I needed time to grieve. He said, of course. The second call was less gentle. He had been talking to a financial advisor, he said. The lake house was sitting empty most of the year. Didn't it make sense to do something with it? Generate some income? He and his wife had actually already spoken to someone in property development, just to explore options, just to have the conversation. You spoke to a developer? I said. About my property? Mom, I'm just trying to help. I need to go, I said, and I hung up. The third call came from my daughter-in-law directly, which had never happened before in 4 years of marriage. Her voice was warm and smooth, like something that had been carefully rehearsed. She wanted me to know that they were coming from a place of love, that they were worried about me managing everything alone, that the lake house was a lot of responsibility for one person, especially at my age, and that if anything were to happen to me, the legal complications could be my age, I repeated. Margaret, I only meant, my name, I said carefully, is Mrs. Calloway, and I will be managing my property just fine. I hung up again. The fourth call was my son, and this time he was not gentle at all. His voice had an edge I hadn't heard since he was a teenager demanding to borrow the car. He said I was being unreasonable. He said his father would have wanted the family to stick together. He said that he had financial pressures. I didn't understand, that things were difficult, that he needed me to meet him halfway. What kind of financial pressures? I asked. Silence. What kind exactly? I pressed. He said he couldn't get into it over the phone. He said we should meet in person. He said the lake house would be the perfect place to have that conversation. Neutral ground, somewhere that meant something to all of us. I told him I would think about it. I did think about it. I thought about it for 2 days, and then I drove to Lake Carver alone on a Wednesday morning in early October, with a thermos of coffee and Don's old cardigan on the passenger seat beside me because I wasn't ready to put it away yet. The lake house was a 2-story cedar and stone house that Don had found in 1997, before the lake became fashionable, before the weekend people discovered it. He'd paid what felt like an impossible sum at the time. We had eaten a lot of pasta that first year, but every summer, every long weekend, every Thanksgiving when the kids were small and the world was manageable, we came back to it. We taught our son to fish off the back dock. We watched our grandchildren. A friend's grandchildren. A friend's grandchildren. We didn't have our own yet. Catch fireflies in mason jars. I had a garden along the south side that produced more tomatoes than we ever knew what to do with. I parked in the gravel drive and sat in the car for a moment, looking at it. It looked exactly the same. The porch light was on, which I didn't remember leaving on. The garden had gone to seed, which made sense. I hadn't been back since July. But then I noticed that the lock on the side gate was new. I got out of the car slowly. I walked to the gate. The lock was a brand I didn't recognize, a heavy padlock, shiny and new, with no key that I owned. I stood there for a long moment, my coffee thermos in my hand, trying to understand what I was looking at. Then I went around to the front door. My key worked on that lock, at least. I went inside. Someone had been here. Recently. The kitchen smelled faintly of takeout containers, the slightly stale smell of food that lingers even after the garbage is taken out. There were 2 chairs pulled up to the dining table where there had been 4 before. A legal pad on the kitchen counter, yellow, with handwriting I recognized as my daughter-in-law's. I stood over it and read the first few lines before I could stop myself. Floor plan. Load-bearing walls. Check with contractor. Parking. Expand or keep gravel. Dock permits. County ordinance. I set my coffee thermos down very carefully on the counter. I picked up the legal pad and read every page. They had been here at least twice based on the dates in the margin. They had brought an architect. They had discussed converting the lake house into a short-term rental property, 10 months out of the year, leaving 2 months for family use. They had discussed which furniture to keep and which to sell. They had drawn a rough floor plan of the second floor and labeled my bedroom, the room where Don and I had slept for 25 years, as Master Suite Planium listing. I folded the legal pad. I put it in my bag. I took photographs of the gate lock, the kitchen, the chairs, everything. And then I called Gerald. He answered on the second ring. Someone has been accessing the property without my permission, I said. And they've been planning to convert it into a rental business. Without my knowledge. Without my consent. Gerald was quiet for a moment. Are you at the lake house now? Yes. Lock the front door, he said. I'll have paperwork ready by Friday. I don't know exactly how they got in. Gerald later told me that the side gate lock was likely a simple removal and replacement. Old gate hardware is rarely secured against someone with basic tools and an hour to spare. The front door, I suspect, was a spare key. Don had kept one under a ceramic frog near the garden for 30 years. I should have found it and moved it years ago. That was my mistake, and I owned it. What I did next was change everything. I hired a locksmith and had every lock on the property replaced in a single afternoon. I had a security system installed. Cameras on the driveway, the dock, the side gate, the back porch. I had the old ceramic frog removed and the garden border cleared, so there was no place to hide anything. I called the county and confirmed that no permit applications had been submitted yet under my address. They had not. I was 1 week ahead of them. Gerald sent a formal no trespass notice to my son and my daughter-in-law at their home address. He sent a second one to the architectural firm whose business card I had found tucked inside the legal pad, a firm called Revive and Build, with an office in the city. Gerald's letter was brief and factual. The property at Lake Carver is privately owned. Access without the owner's written consent constitutes trespass under state law. Any permit applications or development plans proceeding on behalf of parties other than the registered owner will be challenged legally. My son called me that evening. Mom. His voice was very controlled. That was completely unnecessary. Was it? You're treating us like criminals. We were just exploring options. We hadn't decided anything. You changed the lock on my gate, I said. You brought an architect to my property without telling me. You drew floor plans for my bedroom. You wrote down dates and contractor names and dot permit research. That is not exploring options. That is planning. Silence. Here is what I want you to understand, I said. I had written this part down ahead of time because I knew I would need to say it clearly, and I could not risk my voice breaking in the middle of it. The lake house belongs to me. Your father left it to me specifically, with legal protections that he put in place himself because he knew what I apparently did not. I am not going to sell it. I am not going to develop it. I am not going to place it in any kind of arrangement that involves your name or your wife's name on any document. And if anyone accesses that property again without my explicit written permission, Gerald will be making a different kind of phone call. My son started to speak. I talked over him, which I had never done in 63 years of being his mother. I also want you to tell me about the money, the financial pressures you mentioned. I want to understand what's actually happening. Another silence. Longer this time. It's complicated, he finally said. Then uncomplicated. What came out over the next 20 minutes, in pieces, reluctantly, with long pauses where I could hear him deciding how much to admit, was this: my son had invested a significant amount of money, over 3 years, in a business venture with a partner I had never met. The venture had failed. The debt that remained was substantial. My daughter-in-law's family had contributed some of it, which meant they had their own pressure on my son, their own expectations. The lake house, in their calculation, was an asset that could be leveraged, developed, rented, eventually sold, to cover what was owed. And you were going to do all of this, I said slowly, without telling me. We were going to present you with a plan. You were going to present me with a fait accompli, I said. Permits filed, architect hired, contractors booked. And then you would tell me it was already in motion and make me feel like the unreasonable one for objecting. I paused. How long have you been planning this? He didn't answer. How long? I asked again. Since before Dad died, he said quietly. We thought he might agree if we framed it right. I had to set the phone down for a moment. I looked out the window of my kitchen, my house, not the lake house, the home where I had raised this man, where I had packed his lunches and driven him to practice and sat up worrying when he came home late, and I breathed. Don had known. That's what I kept coming back to. He had called Gerald 2 weeks before he died, He'd added that clause about written consent and the 72-hour waiting period. He had looked at me from his pillow and said, "I know what I know." He had known and he had done what he could, and then he had trusted me to do the rest. I picked the phone back up. "I want you to know something," I said. "I love you. I will always love you. Nothing that has happened changes that. But I am not going to help you this way. Not because I don't care about your situation, but because what you were planning was a betrayal. Of me, of your father's memory, of every summer we spent at that lake. And I will not reward a betrayal by pretending it didn't happen." He started to say something. I kept going. "When you're ready to have an honest conversation about your finances, about your marriage, about what you actually need, I will be here. I am your mother, and that does not expire. But until then, the lake house is mine. The answer is no. And I need you to respect that." I hung up. I sat in my kitchen for a long time after that. I made myself a cup of tea. I looked at the photograph on the windowsill. Dawn and me. Lake Carver, 2019. The light going golden over the water behind us. I thought about everything I had said. I thought about whether I had said it right, or too hard, or not hard enough. Then I did something I had not done in a long time. I got in my car, drove the 2 hours to the lake house, and spent the night there alone. I made soup from a can. I sat on the back porch in Don's old cardigan and watched the lake go dark. There were no other houses close enough to see, just the tree line and the water, and, somewhere out there, a loon calling in a way that felt like it was meant for me. I talked to Don, out loud, which I had not done before, which felt strange and also exactly right. I told him about the legal pad, the architect, the gate lock. I told him about the phone call. I told him I thought I understood now why he had made that call to Gerald when he did. The fire in the wood stove crackled. The lake was still. 3 weeks later, Gerald called me with something unexpected. A woman who owned a property 2 lots down from mine. A woman I had met twice at neighborhood association meetings, pleasant, practical, in her 70s, had noticed the new cameras going up and had come over to introduce herself properly. Her name was Ruth. She had been coming to Lake Carver since the 1980s, and she told me, over coffee on my porch, that she had received a visit several months ago from a man with a business card from Revive and Build, asking about her property and whether she'd considered development. She had told him no, but she had also, because she was a practical woman, taken a photograph of his card and noted the date. Gerald added this to the file. He said it painted a picture. I said I imagined it did. My son and I did not speak for 2 months. Then one evening in December he called, and this time his wife was not on the line, and his voice sounded like the version of him I remembered from before, uncertain, a little young, stripped of the careful performance that had replaced it. "I'm in a bad situation," he said. "I know," I said. "I don't know how to fix it. I know that too." We talked for 2 hours. Really talked. About the debt, about his marriage, about what he had convinced himself was practical versus what it had actually been. He cried at one point. So did I. I didn't offer him the lake house. I didn't offer him money I couldn't afford, but I told him I would help him find a financial counselor and that I would sit with him through one honest conversation with my daughter-in-law about what was real and what wasn't, if he wanted that. He said he did. And then he said something that I will carry for a long time. Dad would have seen through us from the beginning, wouldn't he? Yes, I said. He did. Spring came slowly that year. I spent Easter weekend at the lake house alone, which I had never done before, and found that I liked it. The quiet, the particular quality of light in April, the way the dock felt under my feet after a winter of not standing on it. I planted a new section of the garden along the south wall, tomatoes again, because some things you keep doing, not because they're practical, but because they mean something. Ruth came by on Saturday afternoon, and we sat on the porch with coffee and did not talk about anything important, which was its own kind of relief. She had grandchildren coming in July. She showed me photographs on her phone. The lake was very still and the air smelled like pine and cold water turning warm. I put my hand on Don's old cardigan, which I had draped over the arm of the porch chair. I think about that evening a lot now when I felt, for the first time since July, like myself. like a woman who owned something. Not just the lake house, not just the property, not just the asset that someone had tried to take from me while I was still learning how to breathe without the person who had stood next to me for 38 years. Something harder to name than that. The knowledge that I had looked directly at something very difficult and I had not blinked. Don always said I was stronger than I knew. I'm beginning to think he was right. If you've been carrying something like this, a family situation that doesn't have an easy answer, a decision that feels too big for one person, I want you to know that I see you. These stories I share here aren't just stories to me. Some of them are pieces of my own life. Some of them are letters I wish I'd received when I needed them most. Thank you for being here. It means more than I can say.